Good day, everyone. Welcome to our second lesson for 2D animation, navigating early animation tools. Now, before we proceed with the lesson, I'd like you guys to do a quick recap on your own now. What did you learn from our last session? What year or what certain development in animation stood out for you? What was the detail about it that made it stand out? Perhaps it could be the Enchanted Drawing, one of the first regarded animation back in the 1900s. Or it could also be Gertie the Dinosaur, given its integration of keyframing, animation loops, registration marks, and etc. So, whatever it is that your answer for this question will be, it still has a connection to today's topic, which are the early animation tools. So all of those types of animation that we discussed last session were made possible through these early animation tools. The first tool that we would discuss is the magic lantern made in 1659. So this is the earliest known animation device on the list. The magic lantern is actually an early image projection device. So it was not made for animation purely. The magic lantern is also considered the forerunner of modern projectors. It was created by the Dutch scientist Christian Huygens, and interestingly, he originally regretted inventing it, as he thought it was too frivolous. But over time, it became a highly influential tool in the history of animation. The way the magic lantern works is through the use of three parts: the light source, which was originally a candle, a transparent plate with a picture on it, and lens. So what would happen is that the mirror would direct the light through the glass slides and a projection, and it would then project the image drawn on the slides. An adept projectionist could quickly change between the slides placed together to give the illusion of movement. So this is actually considered the earliest instance of projected animation. The illusion of movement is a principle of vision that is constantly utilized in animation in order for it to happen. If this was, or if we would say that this did not exist, animation would not happen, would not be possible. Because in its own, animation is just made of still images with the illusion that they are moving due to the minute changes that gives our brain that tricks our brain into thinking that the image is actually moving. So embedded in the presentation is actually the magic lantern. However, you can find this video in our document where this presentation is uploaded. So do feel free to watch it in order to understand how the magic lantern works. So let's just move on to the next device, the thaumatrope. So the thaumatrope was made in 1825, roughly translating from ancient Greek into wonder turner. So this uncomplicated device comprises of a disc with a different image on each side. Popular combinations of these images were a cage on one side and a bird on the other, or a branch on one side and leaves on the other. On either side of this disc is a piece of string, and when the user twists the disc quickly between these two pieces of strings, it creates an illusion that makes the two images appear as one. It's a very limited animation, but people loved it. The British physician John Ayrton Paris is widely credited for being the inventor of the thaumatrope, although the mathematician Charles Babbage claimed that it was actually invented by the Irish physician William Henry Fitton. Regardless of who actually invented it, Paris is the person who popularized it through its commercial production in 1825. In the next slide is a video of the thaumatrope in action, of the thaumatrope being used. So feel free to watch the video in the document. The next tool is the phenakistoscope. So the phenakistoscope is actually invented by two different people simultaneously. They both inventors were inspired by the work of English scientist Michael Faraday. The first creator was Joseph Pateau when he started to experiment with the optical illusion as a university student in the late 1820s. This experimentation would eventually lead him to create the phenakistoscope a few years later. Around the same time, the Austrian mathematician and inventor Simon von Stamfer was also inspired by the work of Faraday, and he too invented a version of the phenakistoscope, which he named stroboscope. The phenakistoscope works in a very simple way, but the effect it produces is very alluring or very attention grabbing. A series of images are drawn onto a cardboard disc, and then slits are cut in the cardboard between each image. A spindle with a handle is then placed through the middle of the disc so that the disc can be easily turned by hand. The tip of a spindle is then placed on a mirror, with the sequence of images facing the mirror. The user then turns the spindle to rapidly spin the cardboard disc, and when the person looks through the slits, the image appears to move as a looping motion animation. The way in which a phenakistoscope tricks your brain is the same way that the frames of a film trick your brain. When successive images appear in quick enough succession, your brain turns the animated feature into one consistently moving image. The phenakistoscope was really popular for around 2 years before the new technological developments blew open the world of animation. So in the next slide, as always, there is a video of a phenakistoscope at work. So I really encourage you guys to watch it so that you have a little, so that you have an idea on what this device actually is and the effect that it produces. After the phenakistoscope is the zoetrope. So the zoetrope is essentially a cylindrical version of the phenakistoscope, made in 1833 to 1834, between those 2 years. The zoetrope used the same persistence of motion trick to create the illusion of fluid motion. While the phenakistoscope used flat discs, the zoetrope is actually a drum with a series of images on a strip that's placed inside. The images are a series of frames that have incremental changes, just like in modern animation. On the outside of the drum are a number of equally spaced slits. The drum is then spun on its axis, and when the viewer looks through the slits, it looks like the image is moving. It's really a good example of early motion animation. With this change in format, there were a number of improvements. First off, whereas you needed a mirror in order for a phenakistoscope to work, the zoetrope did away with this by making it more accessible. Being in a cylinder also meant that more than one person at a time could view it. Also, the strips inside the drum were easily interchangeable, making it so that the zoetrope can be used to house or project multiple forms of animation. The zoetrope was originally developed by British mathematician William George Horner in 1834, but nothing really happened with it for more than 30 years. But then, in 1867, the toy company Milton Bradley patented a version of the zoetrope, and it eventually became a big hit. As always, we have a video to show how a zoetrope works. You can find it embedded in the document. And next, we have the kineograph, made in 1868. So the kineograph is also known as the flip book. We know what a flip book is. I'm pretty sure everyone has experienced either looking for a flip book or even made their own flip books or small versions of flip books in the corners of their notebooks. It's an absolute delight to think that a flip book is still technically a kineograph. It makes it sound more fancy or elaborate. So that's if you've if you have made a flip book before, you would then understand what a kineograph is because those are essentially the same thing, just in a different name. What happens is that you draw a sequence of images in a book and then you use your thumb to flick through the pages quickly to create the illusion of motion. Funnily enough, the German word for flip book is Domenkino, which translates to thumbed cinema. When you create your own flipbook, it's probably the simplest form of hand-drawn animation there is. Some of you might have experienced making their own flipbook back in Intro to MMA course, MMA100. A flipbook doesn't need to be hand-drawn though. It can be a series of photographs or printed illustrations. It's a very limited animation, but it's very fun to make and it's very accessible to make. There are so many examples of a flipbook you can find online, But here in the presentation, we have a kineograph made back in 1868. The next device is the praxinoscope. Praxinoscope, roughly translating to action viewer, is the next iteration of evolution of the animation devices. This is considered the successor of the zoetrope, and the name of the device has its roots in ancient Greek as well. It was invented in 1877 by the French inventor Charles-Émile Reynaud. It's similar to the zoetrope in a way that it uses the same motion technique and also has a strip of sequential pictures on the inside of the cylinder. But what made it a new development is the significant improvement of the zoetrope design. The praxinoscope did away with the narrow slits that people viewed the animated elements through on the zooscope and replaced it instead with an inner circle of mirrors. So when the outer drum containing the strip of pictures was turned rapidly, the image was then reflected in the mirrors to remain stationary. And the rapid succession of the images then gave the illusion of motion to the stationary reflections. Using mirrors instead of narrow slits meant that the resulting image was brighter and less distorted on the praxinoscope. Raynaud made a number of improvements to the praxinoscope. First, the praxinoscope theater and the theatre optique. These devices were responsible for what was considered as the first ever projected animated film, making Raynaud a true animation pioneer. If you'd like to view the praxinoscope in action, a video is embedded in the document where this lecture video is placed on or is uploaded on. Next, we have a zoopraxiscope. So we have a zoetrope, we have a praxinoscope, now we have a zoopraxiscope. So the zoopraxiscope was made in 1879 by the photographic pioneer Edward Muybridge. So if you guys can recall who Edward Muybridge is, he was you'd see him categorized under film or photography for being the person who managed to capture a horse in motion. Muybridge actually created the zoopraxiscope and made it a forerunner in the concept of movie projectors. The way Muybridge made this work is kind of incredible considering that it involves a kind of de-animation before a reanimation. He'd set up a series of linked cameras to capture animals in motion, and then the individual cameras each gave an image of the animal at different points, similar to how he created the a horse in motion. These photographs were then animated together using the zoopraxiscope. So what Muybridge did was that he reflected something that's happening in real life into the animated medium compared to the previous forms of animation tools that relied on an illustrated medium. So here again, we have a different video of the device at work. I'll leave you guys to watch it at your own time and pace. And next, we have the theater or the theatre optique. In 1888, Charles-Émile Reynaud once then one-upped himself when he improved his original praxinoscope invention and created the theater optique. Whereas the praxinoscope only used a single sequence of images inside a cylinder, the theater optique used a long roll or a long transparent roll of pictures that was wound between two spools. Reynaud himself painted the pictures by hand, and each roll of the hand-drawn animation contained between 300 to 700 frames and could be up to 500 meters in length. Now, if you imagine it now, it is very close to what we know film reels as. A series of mirrors and magic lanterns were used to make the projections possible, and then Reynaud would operate the device by hand and control the speed of the playback. Reno tried to sell his system with the films, but when this didn't work, he decided to start doing theatrical screenings instead. He ended up showing his animated films at the Musée Grévin in Paris, and between 1892 and 1900, he had huge success, performing 12,800 shows to more than 500,000 visitors. The animated films were between 10 to 15 minutes long, and they even included sound effects that were triggered by silver tabs on the roll that activated an electromagnet that would then trigger sounds like a buzzer or a drum. The films also had music written especially for them that would then be played live on the piano, and they also had live dialogue. These are considered the world's first ever projected animated film and the beginning of the art form itself. Reynaud was a true animation pioneer, and his method of using a separate motionless background rather than drawing the background into the frame with the moving characters became a staple of cel animation, which is still used by classic cartoons and the animation industry for decades. Without the work of Reynaud, motion pictures may not even exist today. Now, here, as we can see, the projection of the films became more and more technical and more accessible. Back then, animations could only be viewed by one person at a time, but with modern day technological inventions, or not even modern day technological inventions, but as technology continued to improve, more and more people can enjoy the same animation at the same time. And that is all for our discussion about the early animation tools. Now, I do hope that you guys learned a thing or two about how the technology eventually affects the state of animation and the quality of animation that is being made. Even right now, with our cinemas and online streaming, the quality of the animation released today is affected by it. So, with that, I hope you guys learned a lot from this discussion, and I will see you guys this week for Enjoy Your Foundation Week, and see you soon.